At Magellan Learning Solutions, our mission is to help our clients' educational missions with tailored curricular and operational solutions to help them thrive. To meet the accompanying challenges, the experts at Magellan Learning Solutions offer a full spectrum of services in the areas of curriculum development, operational administration, training and professional development, enrollment and marketing, or custom solutions to niche projects. Whether managing turnkey projects, consulting, or acting as a force multiplier, our experience and relational approach will help your team attain its goals. For all your educational needs, think Magellan. Visit us at thinkmagellan.com today and set up an introductory meeting. Welcome to the Magellan Podcast, Navigating Education in the 21st Century. This podcast brings the expertise of Magellan Learning Solutions to the biggest questions and issues in higher education. It is produced and directed by Adam Rank, podcast theme written and recorded by Wayne Patton, and it features Magellan partners Wayne Patton, Aaron Traphagen, and Emily Hetty. Did you ever have a student who was able to memorize everything you said, but couldn't quite understand how it all fit together? Have you ever found yourself fielding questions about what the point of an assignment is? If so, you might want to spend a little time pondering schemas with us, one of the key components of cognitive load that can help us move students from simply memorizing material to understanding and using it properly. Join the Magellan partners as they discuss schemas.
Thanks, Adam. My name's Aaron Traphagen. I'm here with Dr. Emily Hetty and Dr. Wayne Patton. How are y'all?
Wonderful.
Good.
Do you want me to jump right in with the...
that would be ideal.
Well, as,
you had some important information you wanted to share.
I do. As the Magellan Podcast goes global, I was going to share a little listener data with the team and the audience that we are currently in 19 states in the United States of America. And some interesting points on that is we are kind of not bound to any regional. We're kind of spread out all over the country, but still, what is that? If my math is right, on a cognitive load front, I didn't really do well in math, but that leaves 31 states we still need to get in. So tell your friends about the podcast. Then globally, we are now in 9 countries, and that's a short enough list to read off. We're of course in the United States, France, Germany, Canada, Switzerland, Nepal, Portugal, Ireland, and Sweden.
Oh.
So Scandinavia represented there. So again, I believe that leaves about 170-something other countries to go, but we'll get there. That's pretty neat.
That is eye-opening. I didn't realize that we had people in Sweden listening to us, but that's cool. Jumping into today, if you've listened to our last podcast on cognitive load, which was a few months ago now, I guess, you'll know we kept things pretty broad. We kind of covered the general concepts, the effects related to the theory. We thought of it as a really good primer, or for some, a reminder. But the goal, I think, in these next few sessions is to dig in a little deeper and leave you all, the listeners, with some more targeted and practical takeaways on how to approach things. And so as we jump in there, just a quick, review of cognitive load. Basically, this is a theory related to the amount of information that working memory can hold at a given time. I think we kind of landed in the idea that that's about 3 to 7 items, depending on a bunch of factors. And there were 3 primary types of cognitive load. And the first one was intrinsic load, and that's essentially the inherent complexity of a given task. And then there was the extraneous load, which are essentially the things that distract someone from learning. And then really things through the next few that we'll spend some time on is germane load, which is the really where we want a learner to spend a lot of time. And this is where they're linking new information, the stuff you're teaching them, to existing information structures and schemas.
Speaking of schemas, that's what we're going to focus on today.
Oh, imagine that.
Yes. What an elegant setup. Thank you. So what are schemas? This is one of those terms that's out there in use, but probably not everybody's everyday vocabulary. But quick definition for cognitive load purposes is that schemas are organizational structures in your long-term memory. So whenever you've got a student who's going through a learning process, your goal is always to take the short-term memory information that you've just given them in the class and get them to store it in long-term memory. And that happens a lot more effectively if they have good organizational structures in which to put it. So just to give you a kind of quick example from real life, I've lived in my current house for about 6 years now, and we did a pretty good job moving in, except for maybe the workshop in the basement. We did not do a pretty good job there. I just put all the stuff on the shelves downstairs. So over the last 6 months or so, I've been cleaning the workshop. And what that's involved is categorizing things. So I have the shelf of paints and painting supplies, and I have the shelf of power tools, and I have all kinds of shelves, and I have boxes on some of the shelves to fit things in. And then I have the box that's like the junk drawer box. I have the I don't know what these things are box. And I occasionally talk to my dad and say, Dad, tell me what this thing is so that I can appropriately categorize it. What we don't want is for students' brain spaces to look like a junk drawer. We want them to look organized so that when they need a piece of information, they can find it quickly and put it to use. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to make that happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, in that front, I guess, jumping right in, talking about how we develop or design our courses, curriculum, or experiences to help show those connections as they relate to, say, outcomes, objectives, assignments, or the larger goals that we're trying to achieve with the learner.
So I guess schema formation happens on all kinds of levels, starting at the very, very micro level, like individual assignments in an individual course, going all the way to a kind of larger level, like the whole program, the whole major, or maybe the entire degree they're getting, or beyond that, maybe the set of skills that they're going to use in their life.
Right.
So I think we can talk about how to do that at those different levels.
Yeah, and that's, personally experienced with some of that working in an assessment role, at a university, mapping out our core competency curriculum, for instance, and trying to, determine, how we're going to help students achieve their critical thinking outcomes. And so it was really a matter of sitting down with the different places, faculty from the different areas we felt like these skills could be best introduced and practiced and then sort of assessed, looking at their curriculum, trying to find those ideal spots for where this took place, and then implementing a plan. The key was then to assure through sort of a prerequisite setup that students took those courses in the right order so that, as they moved from course one, the faculty member in course two really had an understanding of what this person had learned, maybe even some touchstones to go back to in their framework of thinking about the subject matter, and to build on and scaffold them. That's really where they get a lot of kind of practice and ability to work with it, learn, fail, grow, and then eventually that same concept as they move into, say, a higher level course within their major, they would be applying those critical thinking skills to a larger project. And we'd be able to assess them because, again, it was well mapped from the beginning through the end. Yeah,
and that was a great project that we worked on together. I mean, I was very proud of the work we did there. And it was especially nice, I think, to be able to transparently say to students, I know you don't necessarily want to take Philosophy 101 and, Hegel's maybe not your favorite bedtime reading. But this course is going to work your brain in certain ways. And that work will help you learn to think critically. So when you're in the world and you encounter a news story and they're interviewing people, you're going to be able to point to the logical fallacy in what so-and-so is saying, and you're going to be able to make an informed decision about how you want to behave and how you want to live your life based on that.
Yeah, and it's real important. I think those underlying, because there's the schema, right? And then there's always these underlying schema, and it's sort of like, what was that movie with Will Smith where they had the little universe in a marble or whatever? Men in Black. Remember, they had that little universe in a marble.
I've seen that movie, and I have no recollection of that. Great, yeah.
Each schema has additional schemas within it that grow within it. And
it wasn't in your schema.
It was not.
But so for me, like establishing kind of those early frameworks when I'm building, especially at that kind of undergrad level from a 100, to a 200, 300, 400 level student, for me, it was a lot of those kinds of philosophical things that I struggled with. Because I felt like every class I went into and they talked about these different concepts, I felt like everybody was coming at it from a way that didn't make it sound at all like what I had just learned in a previous course. So one of the things we really tried to focus on was this idea of like, let's come up with an agreed upon framework. And then we use that, to go back to. And so as we're trying to help a student really, hey, think back to this, ideal, and then build on it from there.
Yeah, we were talking beforehand about how we all learned math. I think we're all of the generation where we had to memorize multiplication tables and things like that, and it was really good fun. I don't know if you all enjoyed it.
No,
I did not. My kids are not of that generation. And I'm seeing the strengths and the weaknesses of the memorization approach. I mean, the weakness is that you memorize it and then you don't really use it. So it just kind of goes away.
Right.
Just kind of junk drawer facts. The strength of it, though, is I really know my math facts. And my kids have maybe jumped past memorization a little too quickly. They haven't mastered those lower levels on the scaffold before they've tried to use math that they don't fully have in their heads.
Sure.
So...
Well, and that kind of brings up, right, so if anybody's even close to a parent of somebody anywhere from 20 to 0, probably 20 to 5 maybe. I forget when they go to school now. But they've probably had an interaction with new math, controversial topic. But the idea of new math, while maybe it wasn't executed perfectly, but the idea was along this concept, right, to help them build these schemes of how to work with the numbers. And I think addition, is a great example. When they start with addition, instead of just saying, 10 plus 13 is 23. I mean, that was just how we were 10 plus 13 is 23. That's just what it is. They start by grouping into, your 10s are over here. Okay, so we've got 20, and then I've got a 3 and a 0. That's 23. Add them together. I thought even the subtraction approach was really interesting because it actually get to subtraction via adding sort of random numbers and figuring out when they finally got to the difference between them. And it seems complicated, and I think maybe the biggest execution thing was they didn't explain it to the people who had to work with their children. But the idea is to give them a better understanding of how the numbers and all these different functions interact with one another. So I think it was a great attempt at trying to establish those schemas and give those kids a better understanding of how, and to be honest with you, naturally, even though it's taught one way, I've found that the way I developed math in my own head to work it seemed more in the new math approach.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Once I figured out that they were teaching my children to do math the same way I do it in my head.
Right.
Like if you ask me to add 27 and 23, I mean, I could sit down with a piece of paper and do 7 plus 3 is 10, 0, carry the 1, 50. Or I can add 25 and 25 and say 27's 2 off, 23's 2 off.
Yep.
And I can do that in my head.
Right.
Because we have a math system that's based on tens.
Right.
And that's the schema, right?
Yep.
They're helping the kids to understand math is based on tens. We think in tens. Decimals work in tens. Then if they can internalize that, everything else starts to fall into place a lot better.
And then they give them a ruler. No.
Someday we'll go to metric system. We're just not there yet.
And so just to backtrack a minute, when you were talking about the workshop space in your house, when it was unorganized, in a mess or the junk drawer, that's still a schema, right? And so students come to us with all sorts of rather an organized schema or the almost lack of a schema, but there's something there. And I think that's a big part of the challenge for when students transition from primary school to middle school or to high school or then to college. Each tier is getting 8 million different types of students with all these different schema that, so it's not so convenient that they're coming in with this common bridge, right? And so that's part of the challenge for teachers, instructors, and faculty is you're dealing with these individuals that every one of them is a unique being that has either a very intact, organized realm in their head of this previously attained data or a mess, right? So,
yeah, and leading students through the process of sorting that mess is really the work of teaching.
Yep.
And I think one great way to do it, I know I've mentioned on previous podcasts, my academic life was as a Victorian literature professor. Nobody has anything but a mess about Victorian literature in their head, if they have anything at all. And they really have trouble filing what we learn about Victorian literature in any way that's meaningful. So because it feels irrelevant to them, we have to spend a lot of time in the class saying, okay, what's happening in this scene? Okay, Okay, do we know all these words, first of all? Okay, let's get the words defined. Are these sentences so long that we're getting lost? Okay, let's talk through what the sentences mean. So you start on this really micro level and you work up, and then you've got a scene that happens, and then you can ask questions like, how do these characters interact with each other? What would happen if in your dorm 2 characters interacted in this way? Would it turn out the same way as it did in this Dickens novel, this George Eliot novel? Or would something different happen? Okay, why would something different happen? And then we start getting into territory that feels familiar to them, because they're talking about how their values maybe conflict with or a little bit different than what they're reading in the book. Suddenly they can put that knowledge somewhere, whereas it just seemed like a mess before.
Yeah, randomness.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and I think the same can be done with history, really. Yeah. I think folks like me who I liked science and whatnot in school, history was a little hard for me because it was so much, it was just dates and names and things that happened. I just wasn't interested, mostly because the history folks that I had anyway did not help me relate it to anything. But, you know, the biggest thing about history that we hear all the time is how it relates to interpreting all of these current things. Wayne's big on history, loves to talk about, you know, conflicts that are going on now, and he can go back and be like, well, this happened here, and, you know, that's the result of these groups of people moved over here. But I don't think a lot of, say, high school history faculty focus on trying to help relate those things to the things that are going on in the world today. And so that relevance and helping kind of overlay those 2 schemas would, you know, create some relevance and help store that stuff in information. Because if I see that, look, this is stuff that influences this, it might have become more important in my mind, which is the other part of retaining information and memory, right, is that repetition and practice and, you know, thinking through it. There's a reason people remember baseball statistics so well, because that's all they think about.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I could chunk, as it were, historical or humanities-based, you know, knowledge in my head in such a way that every time I would get new data about history or culture, there was a grid to attach it to, unlike math, where there was no grid. There old math, new math, you know, yet, like you say, I was great at dates, but it's a whole different kind of math. So there was, I felt like math for a lot of students is that there's just that mystery of I can't find the grid to attach this to.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's hard. I mean, Aaron says I'm not allowed to mention this since he's a Patriots fan, but we were talking ahead of time about the kid who several years ago did his science fair project about whether Tom Brady's footballs were deflated. You know, did Tom Brady cheat? Science fair project. And of course he did. But I think Aaron has told me before that everyone cheats, and everyone does it the same way. But that's just a great application of physics, right? And I don't care about physics. I just don't. But I care about whether Tom Brady cheated because I know he cheated.
Right. And for the record, I didn't say everybody cheats. I said I think all 32 of those teams cheat in the same way. They just got caught.
Emily doesn't care about physics, but she cares about ethics, okay?
I care about physics in this case because it means I get what I want in life.
Right. Well, Tom Brady's gone and we can all move on.
Gone for now.
For now.
We'll see.
All right. So how do we take this, right? So without running the risk of going and staying in the stratosphere with this stuff, how do we take and apply this? So I'm a subject matter expert. I've been asked to write an online course, or I'm a faculty member at a university, and I need to put this course together, you know, for the next school year. How do I take this information, knowing that this germane areas where I want people, I need to help them develop schemas and connect schemas? What do I do? I mean,
I've got a couple of suggestions, and it's all kind of ahead of time work. The first thing, and Aaron, you alluded to this earlier, is figure out where your course fits in the sort of way the curriculum maps. So if it's freshman English, that's pretty easy, right? It's probably the first writing course that most students are taking. Though, if you're at a community college or certain private universities, you may have a developmental course below that. You may not. If you're at like in Virginia, the 4-year publics, we can't do developmental courses. So everybody's starting in freshman comp on day one. That's just how it works. So where do you fit in the university? The second question is, what kind of schema do your students have already? And that's just going to take some time. Talking with your students, doing some diagnostic work on the front end, hearing how they feel about your discipline. I think with a discipline like English, my discipline, students have had it for 12 years, 13 years, something like that. So they feel familiar with English. They are not familiar with the way you teach English at a college. So you need to be very cognizant of that. A discipline like sociology, they've probably never encountered at the high school level. They may have, I'm not sure. Discipline like computer science, students may feel like they've encountered it, but computer science at the college level is not doing things on your computer in your basement. It's a very, very serious mathematical, scientific discipline. So you need to take some time and really talk with your students about where they are, what their assumptions are. And then if it's new material, set it up like it's new material. They may not have a schema that fits at all. And you need to teach them how to build that shelf. What is this discipline? What does it do? What are the things that it values? So on. And I would say, that's several class periods probably, but it's a good investment.
So with those new students and you're starting at the ground floor, so this is a question I have. Do you start just at step one and take a step? Or is there a value in maybe putting the grid out there in front of them and showing them where they're going to be stepping?
Yes. Yeah. I'm talking too much. I'm sorry, but I miss maps sometimes because you would sort of have a sense of what the whole route looked like. Mm-hmm. The thing I kind of love and hate about GPS in the car is, it's step by step, but you really have no sense of progress. You have no sense about how the decisions that GPS is making might affect you.
It's not that engaging.
It's
You're
not
just
engaging.
Blindly following a dot on a screen.
Yeah. And I know back in the day, when I didn't have GPS telling me every second, I would study the map and make sure I understood things.
Well, there's a lot of places I go now I couldn't tell you how to get to without the GPS.
Right. Yeah, I turn it on in town when I know where I'm going. I don't know why I do that. But I think the map and the GPS, right? You want both. How you get the shelf built.
Yeah, and just from other aspects of the cognitive load focus, it helps kind of remove some of that extraneous load because they know what to pay attention to and where they're going. Yeah. And then from an expert level, I guess, you've got to ask yourself, because we've got the other things, like we don't want to get into the redundancy, issues, redundancy effect. And so you can go back and listen to the previous podcast if you have questions about the redundancy effect. But if we bring a bunch of doctoral students in who, have already gone through multiple levels of education, let's just say they're doctor education students, and they've really gone through educational philosophy. They understand all these different theories, and now you're bringing them into a classroom. You wouldn't want to start them down here. They already have schemas established from education and years of experience. You're giving them this new information, and now you want them to be able to just it's a little more free. Let them take their schemas and overlay them into this new information and create the associations with a little less guidance, maybe.
Yeah, and it can be a great kind of metacognitive reflective process if you've got a group of doctoral students to say, how does this idea strike you? How does it fit with what you've learned so far? And let them kind of hash it out.
Sure.
Because, whenever you have a discipline like education, psychology, whatever, there's different schools of thought, and people are going to have more affinity with one or another. You can have some great conversations that way.
Okay. And I would approach this, if going back to just the faculty member now, we've assessed whether these people are new or if they're experts and how do we need to approach their schemas. For me, the next thing I think about is what do I want them to get out of the course? And I'm kind of laying that map out, right, and figuring out what those steps are, ensuring that each piece gives them the prerequisite knowledge for the next piece. I think we do a lot of things sometimes very instinctively, especially face-to-face, a little more. I know when we're doing an online course, we have to be a lot more purposeful about how those steps overlay with one another. Are they going to get the feedback to rearrange their schema? Because that's a danger in an online course, right? Think about you go through a week and then you turn in your assignments. If your work the following week, especially in an intro course, requires 7 days of grading, well, your schema you're using may be wrong in week 2 to do that next work. So trying to think about the types of assignments and are students going to get the corrections so they're using the right schema. Just having a schema, as we talked about, isn't always good, right?
Some schemas are worse than others.
Yeah. So, that would be my next thought, is mapping that out and making sure practically I'm going to be able to provide that stepped scaffolded guidance, but also that feedback and correction, as they're working through it.
Yeah. And
Yeah, when we've, worked with faculty members to build courses out, brilliant PhDs in their discipline, maybe new to online, maybe not, the number of people that humbly admit they've never even grappled with this, and they've taught for years because they know their discipline, they know their craft, they're probably gifted in certain ways to convey that. But when you get down into the weeds of some of these concepts, they literally never been exposed to them before, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, if you're a math professor, chances are you were always good at math. You probably were good at it when you were age 6. And it just kind of intuitively makes sense to you. So then you go on, you get your PhD, and suddenly you're teaching math 100 or math for the liberal arts or something like that. And you're with a group of people who don't want to be there, who don't see the point, who would rather be at the dentist, so on. And it doesn't make sense to them in the same way it does to you.
Yeah.
So it's really it's an act of kindness on the part of the faculty member to just stop and be like, okay, I need to unknow what I know, so that I can reach these people who need a lot of help.
Yeah, and that's what the great teachers do.
Yeah.
They kind of shed their brilliance for a moment and get down in the trenches, whatever, it was, history professor that may have helped you grapple with that more with a different approach than just throwing dates and, seemingly unconnected things to young Aaron Traphagen instead of, I think of the story of a professor I had that literally in college gave us, first thing he did to us was give us a pretest. And he wasn't doing it to abuse us. He really wanted to know what those, 32 or 25, however many students it was, what do we know? And I really think he used that data to model his teaching for that semester. And it was a great class, and he met us where we were.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. Well, any last thoughts or practical tips for folks as we kind of wrap up this conversation about schemas and get ready to head into our follow-on discussion about the ever-exciting world of germane load?
Now, I love the mental picture that schemas give us, right? That we're helping students come up with their filing system or their organizational system. Because I think that really reminds me as a professor when I'm teaching to explain to students why we're doing something and where it fits, where it goes, what you do with it. And I think if you can do that, then students they'll have a much easier time focusing on the things that matter.
Okay. Wayne, anything?
No, that's the map, right?
Yeah,
You've
Yeah.
given them the overview and that context. They need it and they want it, and it helps them.
Excellent. Well, we've appreciated everybody's time today. If you have any thoughts about developing schemas within your courses or curriculum, we'd be happy for you to share them on our social media, Facebook and Instagram. I don't know if you can share on Instagram. I'm not the social media guy, but share them with us.
If you can,
we'd love to hear your insights and thoughts on how you approach this.
Thank you for listening to our discussion on schemas. If you enjoyed the podcast today or found it helpful, follow us on iTunes, Spotify, or where you listen to podcasts, and listen to our earlier episodes on RSI, online learning ecosystems, and cognitive load. Leave a review to let us know what you think. Next week, look for our continuing discussion on cognitive load and what germane load is and how we can design for it. If you or your school is looking for help with RSI, your online ecosystem, curriculum, or online development, think Magellan. Our team would love to help. Reach out to us at thinkmagellan.com. Thank you for joining us on the Magellan Podcast, Navigating Education in the 21st Century.